Thank you all for coming. My name is Jim Walsh. I'm the Regional Director of Food and Water Watch. I am really happy to be here tonight. For those of you who don't know, I think many of you do, Food and Water Watch is an international organization with offices in Europe and in South America, but we also have over a dozen offices here in the United States, and our New Brunswick office is where our New Jersey-based office is. We're here today for a really important discussion about an issue that's important to us. And when I think about Food and Water Watch and what we do, at a very top level view, work to create a world where water is, and the human right to water is defended and preserved. And we work to create more sustainable and equitable food systems. And when I think about the fracking issue, there's a lot of intersections between fracking and our food system. And we're here to explore some of those today and talk about some of these things. And I hope we're able to build a better understanding amongst people as well who are very educated about the concerns around fracking, but maybe don't know as much about our food system and vice versa. But before we get into that, I think that it's really important to recognize some people that really helped to make tonight possible. First, our host committee would not be impossible without them. Rosemary, Parish, Bob Scardapane, WATERSPIRIT, and Tina Weishaus. Thank you so much for your support. We also had the support of over a dozen organizations. And it's a lot to read, but I want to read them all and say their names, and they're in your program as well. But I want to say them because I think it's powerful. I think it's powerful that so many different organizations are coming behind these issues and looking at these issues. And I think working to build a movement around these things. And so, entities like the Bus for Progress, the Central Jersey Coalition Against Endless War, Clean Ocean Action, Dean's Natural Food Market, Earth Friendly Organic Farm, the Green Party of Monmouth County, the New Brunswick Community Food Alliance, New Jersey Friends of Clearwater, the New Jersey Sierra Club, the New Jersey Association of North Jersey Public Policy Network, Northeast Organic Farming Association, PASFAC Sustainability Group, River Road Books, the Secaucus Environmental Commission, Slow Food of Northern New Jersey, the Social Action Committee of Lincroft Unitarian Universalist Church, the Youth Now Activist Network. I would also like to really offer a real warm thank you to the Two River Theater, who's opened their doors not once but twice to us. Really given us an amazing venue to discuss these issues, and I'm deeply appreciative of them for their support on this as well, and their staff who are here tonight to help make this event a great success. I'd also like to thank Wayne Scheller, who actually volunteered to play music for us tonight outside with the piano. And incidentally, he actually plays at the Blue Naboo Grill Club in Fairhaven every other Friday, so if people want to go catch him another time, he's certainly there. And for Dean's Natural Foods for catering tonight's event, really glad to And there were also a tremendous number of volunteers who I will not name you because there's no way we could possibly list everyone, and I will leave somebody out. But what I would ask is if you volunteered to help with this event, could you just stand up real quick and just to be recognized, because I know there's a number of you here helping with our And so to start this book off, this event off, we're going to have a brief movie and video that we're going to show about Foodopoly, which is a book that Wenonah Hauter, Food and Water Watch's executive director, has written. And this event is part of a nationwide book tour that's happening. She wrote a book exploring the issues in history and problems with our food system and what we can do about it, and not just what we can do about it as consumers with our forks, but also transforming the political system and the economic system that has brought us to where we are today with a highly consolidated food system that leaves consumers with very little choice in the marketplace. And for those of you who don't know, Food and Water Watch's executive director is, she's also an organic family farmer in Northern Virginia, which I don't know how she fits that in with running this organization as well. But They provide healthy vegetables to over 500 families in the Washington, D.C. area as part of the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture Program. And, you know, despite this, yeah, she's one of the nation's leading healthy food advocates, and, you know, really believes in her heart that local food movement is really not enough to solve America's food crisis and the public health debacle that it's created. In Foodopoly, she takes aim at the real culprits, the massive consolidation and corporate control of food production, which prevents farmers from raising healthy crops and limits the choices of people that people can make in their grocery stores. Through meticulous research, Wenonah represents a shocking account of how agricultural policy has been hijacked by lobbyists driving on independent farmers and food processors in favor of the likes of Cargill, Tyson, Kraft, and ConAgra. She demonstrates how the impacts ripple far and wide from economic stagnation in rural communities at home to families in poor countries overseas. In the end, Wenonah illustrates how solving this crisis will require a complete structural shift, a grassroots movement to reshape our food system from seed to table, a change that is about politics and not just only about personal choice. So we can start the film now, and we will dim the lights, I'm sure, for that, and then Wenonah will come up and talk briefly about it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. So I grew up on a farm, my family's farm. When I was 11 years old, my father decided it was time to get back to the farm. Well, my parents didn't have a whole lot of money, and they'd been missionaries, so they looked around, and they found this kind of, well, funky is the only way to describe it, farm in Virginia. And these days, Washington, D.C. was a sleepy little southern town, and getting out 45 miles west to where my farm is was kind of a job. There was no super highway like we have today filled with traffic. There were only 2-lane roads going into the city. So the farm that we ended up on had a mile-long dirt driveway with these big ruts. We needed to have a dump truck to get in and out of it. And the house didn't have electricity or plumbing. My dad never did get around to putting the plumbing in. But you can imagine as a teenager, I wasn't thrilled with plucking chickens, squeezing potato bugs, chopping kindling, or getting picked up at high school in a dump truck occasionally. But I didn't want to stay on the farm, and I did go on to become a public interest advocate. And I did, though, learn some of the most valuable lessons in my life living on that farm as a young person. And one of the things that I learned is a lot of respect for what it takes to grow food. And you know, farmers don't get a square deal in our world. And I decided that with the state of agriculture today, where farmers are forced, because of the poverty in rural areas and their inability to make a living, so many of them are selling fracking leases. And we often hear that it's the farmer's fault. So I thought I'd write a book about the structural problems that are actually causing farms to fail, that are allowing our most important resources to be wasted on fracking. So what I want to do in a few minutes tonight is talk about a little farm history and a few statistics. And you know what Mark Twain said about statistics: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And we're going to begin with some lies that the USDA tells about farmers. They say that we have 2.2 million farmers left in this country. But when you look at the details and who they count as farmers, really we only have just under 1 million farmers left in this country. And what do you think an average mid-sized commodity farmer makes in this country for his income, his or her income? $19.2 thousand, and half of that is from a government subsidy. Now there's something wrong with this system. So I want to go back in history to really the beginning of modern farm policy and follow it up through a few decades to explain what's happened to our food system. So you'll remember in the late 1920s, the United States was in a depression, and things were really tough. Things were especially tough in rural areas because people were very poor there, and there was no way that they could sell their products because people in the city didn't have a lot of money. And there had been poverty in rural America since after World War I. So the Roosevelt administration decided that something had to be done to help people. People were suffering from malnutrition. It was really not a pretty picture. So one of the things that they wanted to do to help that 54% of the population at that time that actually lived on 6.8 million farms, they decided that we needed to have legislation that would actually help farmers make a living. So in 1933, the first Farm Bill was passed. And you'll remember since that time that about every 5 years, a Farm Bill is passed, and it is the basis for all of our food and farm policy. Well, in 1933, there were some programs that were developed to help farmers. A grain reserve, so that when there is abundance, farmers would store grains on their farm. When there was a drought, farmers could pull those grains from their farms. That helped to stabilize prices. There were also programs to help supply management so that there wouldn't be overproduction of crops. Because what happens if too many crops are planted, the price plummets and the farmer doesn't make the cost of even putting the crop in the ground. They also had programs to help ensure that farmers actually made the cost of production. So things worked pretty well through World War II. The U.S. was really the food basket for the Allies during the war and after the war because of the devastation, especially in Europe. The U.S. was producing food. Now, not everybody was so happy with those farm policies, though, and the ability of farmers to make a living, and that young men, it was young men at that time, were going into farming. Because the balance of power had shifted after World War II. London was no longer the economic powerhouse, it was now New York. The U.S. had become the industrial giant in the world. So some of the leading businessmen at that time got together and formed an organization called the Committee for Economic Development. And the movers and shakers in this organization were the president of Studebaker, which was a car company at that time, the president of Kodak, and an individual who was one of the leading researchers in consumer research and how you actually get people to do things through PR and advertising. And they got together and started strategizing about how to pull some of these young men from the farm because they needed cheap labor in factories, especially in the north. They weren't thrilled about all of these young people staying and farming, because the history of populism in this country, the farming organizations played a major role. They were very political, really from the time after the Civil War. And they were, in many cases, going up against the big banks and the railroads and really advocating for themselves. So these individuals who formed the Committee for Economic Development, they had kind of a different plan for the United States. And so they started lobbying. And I'm not suggesting that this is some kind of weird conspiracy. This is simply men who had a lot of economic interests in common, working together to strategize and create what they thought would be the best future for themselves and, you know, maybe in some cases for their country. They were able to get most of the titans of industry to join this organization over several decades. And by 1952, they were becoming very powerful, and the Eisenhower administration came into office, and they were able to lobby the Eisenhower administration to begin cutting back on some of these farm programs. And there was an individual who was the Department of Agriculture's secretary. His name was Ezra Benson. He was very much of an ideologue. He was a very strict Mormon. He actually had agricultural interests out in Utah. And he believed that the farm programs were leading to communism. Now, you'll remember that this was the era of the McCarthy hearings and so forth. So he was able to use this and to begin to make some headway. Now, by the 1960s, the Committee for Economic Development had become very, very powerful. They had most of the largest institutions, media institutions, universities, most of the important people in the U.S. Who had this business frame of reference had joined the Committee for Economic Development. And they wrote this plan with 18 economics departments. It was called an Adaptive Plan for Agriculture. And it laid out their vision for vertical integration, you know, the idea that one company controls production of a food item from farm to a grocery store label. It laid out a plan for how to begin to move young men into other jobs and to be not only to work in factories, but to become management and really to get out of agriculture. And they also began to lay out a vision for what they called efficiency, but it was basically the outsourcing of food to other countries where it would be cheaper to produce. Later in the 1960s, in 1964, they wrote a plan for free trade, and part of that plan was all about basically growing grains in the United States, growing fruits and vegetables elsewhere, processing elsewhere when possible, because it would be cheaper. And of course, efficiency is always the word that's tossed around. So they continued their lobbying, and the farm programs were being chipped away, the ability of farmers to actually make the cost of production. Now, in the 1970s, Ezra Benson's protege became the Secretary of Agriculture under Richard Nixon, and his name was Ezra Benson. I remember him, maybe some of you remember him. He was kind of well, people made fun of him a lot. He had a very big mouth. He often put his foot in his mouth. But the message that he gave to farmers was, get big or get out. He encouraged farmers to buy a lot of equipment, to buy a lot of land, and that there was going to be this fabulous export market that was going to make them rich. And then he got on the circuit, speaking circuit in rural areas. And he was actually very persuasive and very successful. Many farmers bought a lot of land, they bought equipment, and there was only 1 year in the 70s that there was any export market, and that's when the Russians had a grain failure. So what happened? There was a major agricultural crisis. Farmers went out of business, and things were really tough in rural areas because there was no export market. And the Department of Agriculture never really effectively dealt with this problem. And many of you who are old enough might remember the movies and the books that were written during this time, but none of them really explained what was going on and why farmers were going out of business. And that period, we lost many of those 6.8 million farms, bringing us down to under a million today. So then the Reagan administration came into office, and there had been much lobbying by the oil and gas industry, by the grocery industry, by many industries who were not happy with our antitrust laws at that time. Because after FDR was elected, by the end of the 1940s, we were beginning to strengthen the antitrust laws, those laws that prevent companies from buying competitors or acquiring competitors. And industry did not like this. So the oil industry, of course, helped put Ronald Reagan into office. And one of the major targets was to deregulate our antitrust law. And they basically eviscerated antitrust. I had the opportunity in writing Foodopoly to interview Michael Perchuk, who was a commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission at this time. And he told me about how James Miller, the appointee, came in, slashed the budget, got rid of whole departments, made practices that had been illegal legal, like competitors being able to be merged. And probably most importantly, they narrowed the definition of what an antitrust violation actually is. And the truth is that no president since that time has been brave enough to actually do something about antitrust. So into the 1990s, as companies began to merge, become bigger, what happens when companies get bigger and they become more economically and politically powerful, and they began to have a chilling effect upon our democracy? One of the things that the food industry and the manufacturing industry lobbied for was to be able to offshore a lot of things that were produced in the United States. And we all know what that has led to. Now, what's interesting is that report in 1964 by the Committee for Economic Development on so-called free trade. When you look at their recommendations, it very much mirrors what happened with the World Trade Organization and the North America Free Trade Agreement and many of the trade agreements that were negotiated after that time. And of course, today the U.S. is negotiating a Trans-Pacific partnership that will have a not only effect on food, but on natural gas as well. So once the trade agreements were signed, there was a tremendous amount of pressure to change farm policy. And this happened under the Clinton administration. There was a farm bill passed. It was called Freedom to Farm, kind of Orwellian, I'm afraid. Very shortly, farmers were calling it Freedom to Fail. And what it did is it got rid of all of the last vestiges of that 1933 farm bill. It got rid of the grain reserve. It got rid of all of the USDA's role in supply management of crops. Farmers were no longer assured that they were going to get any cost of production. And they were supposed to be thriving because the free market was going to basically protect them. Well, within 2 years, by 1998, the overproduction, because what happens once there's no supply management, farmers plant as much as they possibly can to take advantage of their land and their equipment, and because they know things are going to be really tough, because there aren't going to be any safety nets. So by 1998, the price of corn had dropped by 50%, the price of soy had dropped by 40%. And there was real pain in rural areas, more farms going out of business, a lot of pressure on Congress. So what does Congress do in this situation? Well, they use taxpayer money to help farmers survive rather than instituting any of those programs that actually worked and helped agriculture actually work better. And so by 2002, these programs were permanent, and that's 17 years ago when the subsidy system was born. But let's talk about who has benefited from the subsidy system the most. We're talking about the 4 grocery manufacturers that now control about 50% of the market overall, but in some areas 70 to 90%. Because as the grocery industry consolidated, that meant that there was a need for huge volume of products, like 1 billion pounds of beef. And we had the food processing industry. We have 20 companies that basically control most of the brands in the grocery store. So you go into the grocery store and you think there's this enormous diversity and choice. But it's, just a handful of companies that are developing products using fat, sugar, and salt to addict people to them, because Americans spend about 90% of their grocery budget or their food budget on processed food. And so this means that there really isn't a lot of choice. There's a lot of advertising to talk people into eating the foods in their niche market. I mean, figure the average child sees just under 5,000 junk food ads a year. And before I end and we go on to talk about some of these other fracking issues, let's look at who really benefits from the subsidy system. Well, the first few years after the subsidies were initiated, the soda industry saved about $1 billion. The meat industry was completely restructured during this time because there were now cheap grains that made it possible to raise animals in these confined feeding operations. So in the past, independent livestock growers raised their own grain, and that meant that they usually used the waste to fertilize the fields, and it was kind of an ecological system. But if you look at 1995 at the hog industry as an example, 30% of hogs were grown in a Smithfield type operation, and that was because the meat packers, the Tysons and those types of companies were beginning to buy up their competitors, and so we were beginning to see this kind of consolidation. But after the 1996 Farm Bill and the overproduction and the low prices of the crops that comprise the feed for animals, by 2005 the pork industry was completely consolidated, and 95% of hogs were grown on factory farms. So that's really kind of a short lesson in what's happened to our food system and why we need to add to the good food agenda these more structural issues. Because, it's really great when we have access to local food. It's great for the farmer to be able to sell directly to customers. It's great for the consumer. But we have 300 million people. Not everybody lives near a farmer's market. And if we really want to have a food system that feeds everybody, we're going to need to change some of the structural rules that have actually made such a dysfunctional food system, and that mean that farmers actually can't get their product to market. And unfortunately, the same is true with organic food, because there's 20 giant food processing companies, 14 of them own the largest organic brands. And we also see the kind of consolidation in the organics industry. So I don't say this to discourage people, but to make us mad so that we work harder and we fight to change these things, and we start small and we begin building, because I am confident that with all the excitement about food and all of the anger about fracking, that we are going to change the political system and we're going to take back our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wenonah. So I realized I was getting old earlier because I had to put the font up to about 28 in order to read this. And because of that, I didn't turn the page over and on my notes, and I can't believe I just didn't instinctively do this, but I did not recognize the amazing work that Food and Water Watch's staff went into putting this together. So I'd like to recognize the feedback. Emily Ruman really did a bang-up job. Getting, the 300 people into a room is not an easy task, and it really was really great organizing by her and bringing all the different coalition partners together and volunteers and coordinated logistics out there and everything. So, Emily, really great job. Thank you. Just a housekeeping thing. You see Dylan walking up and down right here with a little box. It's not the collection basket for money. Although we do have a table outside where you can become members. But it's actually, you should have got a note card when you came in. So if you have a note card, you see him walking around, you can hand him with a question. So during the panel question and answer section, you can have your question written down there, and we'll go through them. We'll try to answer as many as possible before we get out of here. He'll be walking around just waving down if you see it. I want to now introduce our panelists. We have a really great group of panelists here tonight, and I'm really excited and glad they all came out to join us. The first person I'm going to introduce all of our panelists, and then we'll ask them to come up and speak. The first person is Dean Nelson. Dean opened Dean's Natural Food Markets, its first location in 1995 in Ocean, New Jersey. And its mission is to provide the best organic products available and to put customers and community before profits. Wouldn't it be great if all companies strove to do that? In 2004, Dean's opened its second location in Shrewsbury, New Jersey, and in 2012 opened the third location in Basking Ridge. And Dean's passion for natural food, he says, is second only to the love he has for his family and the ability to contribute to the wellness of his community and acknowledgement received from customers and peers that he does what's right. And it's, I think is very humbling and inspiring. Dean really strives to make a difference. He sits on several industry advisory boards, is active in the movement to gain national food labeling laws for genetically engineered foods. Has been very helpful in support of our campaign for labeling in New Jersey. They support many local nonprofit groups, including the Monmouth County SPCA, Mary's Place, the Cancer Support Community, and Restore the Shore project. So let's warm welcome to Dean. Next, I'd like to introduce Stephen Cleghorn. He's a PhD, but also a farmer, Paradise Gardens Farms. And he's an organic farmer in Jefferson County, Pennsylvania. His PhD is in sociology. In 2005, he and his wife, Lucinda, founded Paradise Garden and Farm. It's a USDA certified organic farm. In 2008, they opened the first licensed goat milk creamery in the Northwest region of Pennsylvania. And since 2010, Dr. Cleghorn has been educating the public about the current negative public health effects and environmental impacts of unconventional drilling for natural gas in the Marcellus Shale. as well as poorly understood long-term risks that could cause irreparable harm to the environment. His wife died of cancer in November 2011. Dr. Cleghorn has created a deed restriction on his farm that honors her memory and declares certain rights of nature that prohibit any activity like drilling for shale gas that might harm natural communities and ecosystems present to the surface and below his farm. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming. Our final panelist, Sean Dixon, is the Coastal Policy Attorney for Clean Ocean Action. He's a graduate of Pace Law School, Center for Environmental Legal Studies with a law degree in environmental law and an LLM in climate change law. Sean has graduated from Boston University, where he studied marine biology and geology in the school's maritime program, at Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and Yale University of Forestry and Environmental Studies, where he earned an MDM. The focus on climate change and coastal and marine ecosystems was his focus there. At Clean Ocean Action, Sean's work ranges from dredge materials and coastal water quality to liquefied natural gas imports and exports, offshore oil gas activities, climate change, and coastal development. Sean has also recently become the chair of the American Bar Association Section of Environmental Energy and Resource and a spring conference on environmental law, and is a senior fellow of the Environmental Leadership Program. We're really honored to have him here as well. Thank you. I'm going to invite Dean to come up here and say a few words as our first panelist. And, if you have questions, write them down, hand them up. Thank you so much, Dean.
It just occurred to me that there's Wenonah, a doctor, a lawyer, and a guy who got his 760 on his SATs. And you're about to take me seriously. And that's true on the 760, by the way. Not proud of it. I want to thank everyone for being here and inspiring me to continue to be able to contribute to the community and to the issues that we find so important. You know, when I got the call from Jim, he said, hey, do you want to come speak on a panel? I first of all had no idea the magnitude of it. And I said, sure, I'll go speak on a panel. I mean, the issue is very, very close to me. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? Because, you know, the other day I had a root canal and I had some Novocaine and I was trying to say fracking and it sounded like Elmer Fudd on Xanax. So I said, I'm going to hold off on the fracking, I'll talk about GMOs. It came out of my mouth a little smoother. So, and I don't mean to minimize the trivialness of it, but it's obviously a serious issue for all of us. So he said, well, I want you to share your experience as a natural food retailer. And I said, okay, I think that I can do that. But I really don't consider myself a retailer. I consider myself an educator. And I consider myself an individual who's trying to raise consciousness, because conscious citizens and conscious communities make the right decisions. And the fact that all of you are here today signifies the fact that we are clearly moving in the right direction. So I'm thinking to myself, you know, how I can impact the community, how I can impact my business. And it occurs to me, and as I sit here and I listen all the time, and I sit on a couple panels and I listen to people talk about, you know, somewhat being victimized, self-victimized, I realized that I have a great friend, and I have a great friend that all of you have, and his name is Ben Franklin. And Ben has a really loud voice, and we don't use him enough, and we don't understand the power that Ben has. So I realized that Ben's a really great guy, he's a really great asset, because when I pull Ben out of my pocket and I pay for something, I endorse it and I vote for it, and I tell the manufacturer and the vendor and the farming community and the world that I'm in favor of that product and I want more of it. And I think that there's a level of unconsciousness that we proceed through the day, and we realize that we really need to spend a little more time thinking about where our money goes, because at the end of the day, I see two solutions: politicians and money, because that's really what this is all about. So, and the other thing I just want to point out is, you know, I'm listening to, I took some time last night and I watched Democracy Now! Where Wenonah did a 45-minute presentation, and she talked about the fact that Walmart represents 1 out of every $3 in the grocery industry. And again, the bell just goes off, and I have nothing against Walmart, but I'm saying It's our dollar that's going there, and if we stop the dollar, we facilitate change. And for the life of me, I don't understand why we don't wake up and we don't understand and realize where we're putting our money. So it's your consumer dollar that drives the market, it's the consumer dollar that drives politics, and it's consumer dollars that obviously drives big business. So I get up the next morning and I go for a run, and I'm running and I'm saying to myself, gosh man, I really think I'm going to have a great conversation with everybody. I'm going to talk about Ben and how great Ben is and all this other stuff. And I realize, wait a second, Ben's the enemy, because it's all about Ben. And now I'm confused, and I realize that Ben is really tofu. Ben has no flavor, he has no nothing until we apply whatever we want it is that we want to apply to it. So I realize that guns don't kill, people do, and Ben doesn't hurt us. We hurt ourselves by where we spend our dollars. So my gripe isn't with big business. My gripe is with unethical business. I'm a small retailer, and we are growing, and I'm grateful for the support of those of you that are here that support us. And all I really ask is that I have a level playing field. And I don't expect to buy as well as the big boxes. I don't expect to be cheaper, but I just want a chance to compete. And when another company tells another company that if you sell to them, I won't buy from you anymore, or when a manufacturer says to a farmer, I'm only going to sell you sterile GMO seed, and if you use that seed or disrespect it, because it's now the law that Monsanto officially, as everybody knows, owns the patent on soybean, then I'm going to sue you, and you're no longer going to be able to provide for your family and for your community. I think that's wrong. And I just want to share couple other things with you. I was sitting, and this is a true story, and it's no joke. I won't joke anymore. I'm sitting in November, it's November, and I'm sitting having breakfast, and a very, very good friend of mine is one of the fathers of the GMO movement. His name's Jimbo. He owns Jimbo's Naturally in San Diego. He started the non-GMO project. And I'm sitting there having breakfast, and I look in front of me, and there's Kashi, Cascadian Farms, and Bare Naked Granola, and Silk. And I said to myself, I'm a part of the problem. I'm supporting the companies of the products that I sell that are owned by subsidiaries that are pumping $1 million a day into a marketing program to deceive the public about the cost of genetically modified foods, as well as the safety, I might add. And I realized that it was time for me to change my personal habits and to take a more aggressive position. So I've seen a lot of things in my 20 years in the industry. I remember when Stonyfield was an 8-ounce container and it was all organic, and they went to 6 ounces and they kept the price the same. And then I remembered when they put milled cane in their product for the first time, and I remember a bunch of retailers were all on the phone with one another saying, what's milled cane? Like, I don't know, it's gotta be something. We had no idea what it was, and that was their way of slipping sugar into their product to sweeten it. And then ultimately, as you know, they were purchased by Dannon, and I thought that was kind of sneaky. I remember Kraft bought Boca, and that was one of the first big conglomerates to absorb one of the products that was in natural food stores. And I used to be able to place an order for $300. That was my minimum order. So we call up Boca and we say, hey, we want to place an order. And they said, you have to place a 300-pound order. I'm like, that is a lot of Boca burgers. I'm going to pass on that. I'm going to find another burger. Recently, I was at my favorite vegan restaurant in New York City, and I know the owners very well, and they said, hey, we came out with a great line of frozen organic products. I'm like, great, let me have them. Let's bring them into the stores. Let's support you. You're great people. And they said, well, we have bad news. Whole Foods has a 2-year exclusive on it, so I'm unable to carry that product, and probably wouldn't carry it now if I had the opportunity. And the list goes on and on about these stories, and we all know them. But there's some great news. And as an entrepreneur and as a business person, as a member of the community, I don't consider myself a victim. I'm constantly inspired. And for every big box that opens up around me, I feel more resilient, a greater cause. But let me share some things with you. If someone would have asked me 5 years ago where my company was going to be, I probably would have said we would have been out of business. And we have doubled our business in the last 2 years thanks to you. My produce supply, thank you. My produce supplier, which was once all conventional, 50% of their sales now represents organic. 5 years ago, the non-GMO project, or non-GMO labeling, didn't exist in my stores. Today, there's over 6,000 items that are verified by the non-GMO project. Yesterday, I spoke with the former president of Whole Foods. He happens to be a friend of mine, and he expressed to me, and he actually penned the wording of Whole Foods' new policy on GMOs. He said to me, in 5 years, there will no longer be such a term as natural foods. They'll either be organic or they will be genetically modified foods, because there is no such definition of natural, and that will ultimately come out in the real world. He also told me, as you know, that by 2018, that Whole Foods will be requiring mandatory labeling, as all of you know, for their genetically modified foods. And our policy at Dean's now is that we will no longer allow genetically modified foods, any of the 5 high-risk ingredients in our store, without them being certified organic or without them being verified by the non-GMO project. So no more GMOs at Dean's. Our policy in there, and I don't mean to throw stones at them, is that they're going to carry the products and they'll be labeled genetically modified, and we will no longer carry them. 69.5% of all Americans now purchase an organic product, and the natural food industry has outpaced the growth of the conventional industry by about 27% in 2012. So everything is moving in the right direction. There's bumps along the road, and I really think that with your help and with some consciousness, that we can really make a difference. I just want to share a perspective as a retailer, my own personal experience. I spent years building my business, and I kind of think of a sandcastle, and you look out and you build it and you sacrifice, and you look out on the horizon and the ocean's flat and you say, God, this is great, everybody comes, they love my sandcastle. And then you hear the weather report and there's a tsunami coming, and this big wave, uncontrollable wave comes, and it wipes out your sandcastle. And then you build it again, and they knock it down again, and you build it again. And I thank all of you for supporting me and allowing me to reach out and make a difference. Thank you.
Greatly appreciate you coming here and sharing that with us tonight. Next, I'm going to invite Sean Dixon, Coastal Policy Attorney for Clean Ocean Action, to come up. Thank you, Sean.
So with the eloquence with which you just presented your business, I have to envision that 760 on the SATs comes with an amazing story as to what happened. So, it's illegal in the state of New Jersey. Colorado? Okay. So, that's not official statement. We're not recording this. So we've talked a lot about food today, and we're going to talk more about food. And in all my conversations on food, we're always talking about what drives it. And the answer obviously is trucks. But beyond that, really it's the same as what drives life. And that's water and energy. And so when you look at those two things, water brings everything that you need to grow produce. Energy drives, and water helps produce your equipment on your farm, your transportation to and from a farm to the market, or among farms, as we heard with CAFOs and all sorts of industrial farming now. It's not something that you can do on one piece of property anymore without getting all this economic pressure. So you've got fertilizer that comes from water and energy and oil, and all these things are interconnected. So on the food side of things, one of the things that often gets overlooked is the ocean. Obviously, I come from an oceans background, and so I want to talk briefly about fish and something that's wild caught, something that is as close to being natural as you can get, something that we thought was unassailably protected against GMOs for a very, very long time, which is now turning out to not be the case. Wild-caught fish also depends on water and energy. Even though you're getting it from the ocean that ostensibly doesn't need to be fed with grain from another farm halfway around the world, it is interconnected with those two issues. Gasoline is what drives the fisherman's ability to go out and catch the fish. If gasoline prices go up incrementally small amounts, then their profit margin, their ability to pay their fishermen, drops below the level that even allows them to go out at sea. So your economic pressures of energy and of water are also driving the fishing industry, which is the last wild caught industry in the planet, towards mega big box store fishing boats, if you will, and it's forcing out the little fishermen, and it's doing the exact same thing. So what we're seeing on land, what we're seeing in the ocean, they're all one and the same, and they're all driven by energy. When you've got pollution impacts that come into play, and this is where fracking really builds into the whole food system debate, in the ocean with fisheries, for example, when you've got power plants that are killing more fish in any given year through their once-through cooling systems than the fishermen that live in that state can catch in a year, then you've got a problem with priorities. When you've got estuaries that are getting full of fracking wastewater pollution and overdevelopment because water is being sucked out of our aquifers and upstream to the point where our estuaries, our rivers, our creeks, and our tidal marshes, they're just sedimented pollution pits. And those are the places that our fish need to come and reproduce and spawn. So all of these things are definitely interconnected, which leads me to what drives energy. And today, I guess we're talking a little bit about fracking as well. And on the fracking side, there's a lot of things that drive fracking. Pretty much recently it was a push for new technologies that allowed you to frack horizontally, frack in lots more places. I swear, at one of these days, fracking is going to stop showing up as a red line word on Microsoft Word. It's beginning to become so ubiquitous, but not yet, so maybe soon. But right now, we've got so much fracking that we're at the same exact place that we were in the 60s and 70s with food. We're at the precipice, and we're seeing all these bad things happen, and we're not doing anything about them. We're just walking right into the exact same problem. You've got energy companies that have bought up all of the fracking rights and all the natural gas rights, and those are foreign companies, those are big mega companies that we saw on the graph earlier. And they're looking at their profits go down because there's so much of it. The natural gas prices are going down. Those low natural gas prices, even though we're producing more than we have in forever in the United States, they're so low that investments in research, in solar, in wind, are now ceasing. They're being shut off because there's just not enough money to spend. The margins are so tight on getting those renewable energies off of the ground that 10 cents per kilowatt hour or whatnot isn't achievable anymore for those industries. So we're in a quagmire where there's a lot of energy in terms of fracked purchasing power, if you will, but the energy companies, they want more. Just like big farms wanted more in the 70s. They wanted to buy up as much rights as they could. Out west, energy companies can put a well on your land without even asking you for your permission because they own the rights to it. These are large-scale problems that are leading to we want more, even though they already have just about everything. And where is that more coming from? And this is something that I work a lot with Food and Water Watch on, and that's exports and energy exports. And when we've got a system where the price of natural gas per unit in America is $2 per unit, $2.50, but in China and Europe it's $15, $16 per unit, then there's significant economic pressure to send that energy overseas. So right now, and a report recently issued by Food and Water Watch highlighted this very well. Right now, we've got a rush to export natural gas from the United States. That rush has led to, it took advantage of a law that has been on the books for a very long time that says that if you export natural gas to one of about 20 countries, for $50 filing fee, you get approved. That's it, $50 and you're approved. So right now, we've already tied our hands to 40% of our daily natural gas production could be sent overseas. 40%, almost half of all the natural gas made in America is now licensed to be sent overseas because there's this provision that allows it to happen without any checks or balances. So unless there's a law change, that's going to continue happening. If you got $50, you can send it overseas. We're also looking to change the laws with the partnerships, with the Pacific partnerships that were mentioned before, so that all the other 170 odd countries in the world can take advantage of this as well. So this is something that's popping up right now, and these energy companies are going to make lots and lots of money off this, even though we know, and the United States government has done research to show that if we export even a small part of that already approved 40%, we're talking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% of our daily production, half of that exported gas is going to come from fracking, from new fracking. So this whole system is interconnected. When you've got fracking industries which take up the water that farmers need to grow food, that then put that water back into the places that farmers usually get their water to grow food, that then washes downhill through where the farmers are growing food to the estuaries to kill the fish that we also depend on for food. And then all of our energy costs are going up. It's just a messed up system, and we got to get ahead of this problem. So I'll be here for questions later, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Cleghorn up to say some words. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Now, I want to tell the timekeeper that I have a commercial first before the 5-minute start. Okay. Commercials are always good. First of all, I'd like people to take away something from meetings like this that they can use afterwards. There are 2 resources online that I would recommend to you. One of them is on my website, my farm website called ParadiseGardensAndFarm.com, all spelled out, ParadiseGardensAndFarm.com, in which there's a 50-minute PowerPoint presentation on many of the issues that I'm going to present tonight. The second one, an invaluable list called List of the Harmed. Just do an internet search, List of the Harmed, and you will come across a list of over 1,100 cases of all kinds of harm being done by fracking. So with that, the commercial is over. I want you to take that away from you. I'm going to turn very quickly and go very quickly through some of the interconnections between fracking and farming that I see. Some of them don't get mentioned much, but this one is really important. We all know about climate change. The big picture for farmers is the same as it is for all of humanity. We watch the weather closely. The climate is changing and could change so drastically as to wipe out any need for food because we'll all be gone, okay? The International Energy Agency says that this golden age of gas will bring about 6-degree Fahrenheit warming of the planet all by itself. It's a fossil fuel after all. If we get it out of the ground and we burn it to the extent that it's planned to be burned, that's what we're talking about. Secondly, you just heard from Sean, and I want to emphasize it, that natural gas is related to nitrogen fertilizers that we put into the ground. It is the feedstock for those fertilizers. When you have $82 of natural gas producing a ton of ammonia and a ton of anhydrous ammonium that sells for $800, you have a huge incentive, in fact, represented by the development of billion-dollar expansions of nitrogen fertilizer plants across the country right now. You have a huge incentive to increase, to double down on the amount of stuff that we put in the soil that destroys the organic matter in the soil, that releases nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than CO2. Right now, 40% of all the greenhouse gases in this country are produced by what we put in the ground in farming. That is something we should be turning around, not something we should be doubling down on. And yet the American Farm Bureau Federation supports fracking and supports natural gas development through fracking. The other thing I don't think people think about too much is that in order to do this activity, you have to first fracture the rural community. The rural community of small farmers maintains itself on common values of a devotion to hard work, care for the land, and some of those values are directly inimical to the business model of this industry. The first thing they have to do is come in and fracture the community before they can fracture the shale. They have to do that because they have to create a world of haves and have-nots in terms of people profiting differentially from this kind of development. Everywhere energy extraction has taken over a county in this country, we've seen an increasing disparity between haves and have-nots, and we've seen people getting out of farming. So those are a couple of things to think about. Now I want to go to the ones that we usually talk about in terms of water and air, but I'm only going to touch on them because we can get to that in the question and answer session. I think this big picture people don't see. People do not see this big picture. The scale and density of this development. We're talking about living in a gas field. This is an industry without boundaries, not subject to zoning restrictions that we would normally use for industrial activities to set them off from human habitation. This extraction requires a relentless density of well pads of 1 to 2 per square mile, with ancillary compressor stations, midstream facilities, and pipelines all around where there is already a pre-existing community of people and animals. That is unprecedented. They have not done that anywhere else in the country to the extent they're going to do it in the Marcellus Shale. And what's going to happen is that people like me and my goats, you saw my goat out there on the poster outside, are going to be living in a gas field, breathing 24/7 hydrocarbons that are part of that industrial activity. We are going to be continuously subject to spills and water contamination, whether it's something coming down the hill that comes into our pastures, or whether over time it comes up into our water tables from what we're putting down into the shale. Let me be clear about this right now. Water is being contaminated right now by short-term problems like the 6% failure rate of casings as they drill, mobilizing methane, mobilizing God knows what below the ground coming into our water right now. That's happening right now. But the long-run picture is even more sobering. They are going to put 100,000 plus well bores into 1/2 the landmass of Pennsylvania over the next 50 years. Each one of those well bores will be thousands of times more porous than the rock through which they drilled it, and they are saying that they will hold up in perpetuity to keep down in the hole what we put down in the hole and what's already down in the shale. Now I'm getting the end here, and I'm going to get to the end very quickly. We know that air is getting polluted. We know that ozone levels are rising wherever fracking is happening. We know that animals are getting sickened. The main cause of animals getting sickened is aspiration pneumonia from breathing in that crap. And they show it before we show it. So they are like bellwethers for us as to what's going to happen to us long time. Our countryside right now is becoming a sacrifice zone for the energy needs of this country and its urban areas. That's not the fault of the city people. That's the fault of the people who are directing us away, as Sean indicated, from the kinds of solutions we could be doing. Fracking cannot be done safely as it's currently done. There's no amount of green completion you can do to take away the long-term risk of all of those holes in the ground, providing pathways over time as that concrete and steel corrodes over time. 50, 100 years from now, half the land mass of Pennsylvania could be unusable for farming. That is if we get through the climate change problem, which we're contributing to by doing this. So, I tried to sum this all up in one sentence. My wife, Lucinda, my dear departed wife, Lucinda, used to say, "Stephen, you speak in paragraphs." And she was right. So, I tried to put it into one sentence. I think the word count is 300 words or something. But I'm going to read this sentence to you. Because I think for me, rather than, as Wendell Berry says, putting our faith in 2 inches of humus that will build under the trees every 1,000 years, rather than living in harmony with nature, we are pursuing an arrogant way of living with nature here at the end of the fossil fuel era, doubling down on it, and here's what's happened. I'm going to read this to you precisely. Under the capitalist imperative of profit, we are steadily turning the earth into a blank medium, into which genetically modified seeds and fossil fuel fertilizers are inserted by global chemical, oil, and gas corporations that conspire with big agriculture to make the highest profits for a very few at the expense of what goes on inside millions of our bodies, creating a brand new world of cheap food that yields type 2 diabetes and food allergies at skyrocketing rates of cancer, while all the while, big insurance and big pharma build a bigger healthcare system that happily creates even more jobs to pick up the pieces at the highest profits they can get. And the planet warms beyond recognition, and those who call for a halt to this kind of madness are deemed the mad ones by the powers that be in the high political seats bought and purchased by the corporate titans of the fossil fuel era.
So I've gotten a few questions already. If you haven't gotten your questions in, please bring them up there. Somebody's filtering them through to me and getting them up here. We'll get a chance. I already have a ton of them here. I know we're not going to be able to answer them all, but there's a lot of repeats in here in general. One question that got asked is specifically about our food system. And, it's something that I think that a lot of people may be wondering about is, shouldn't farmers use commodity futures trading to hedge their crops and make a profit, and also be buying crop insurance? So does anybody want to tackle that question?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, right. Shouldn't farmers use commodity futures trading to hedge their crops and make a profit and also be buying crop insurance?
Wenonah, I just want to say that most farmers are price followers and not price leaders, and the whole commodity market is part of the problem. Their fate is being determined by people who are looking at it strictly from a financial point of view, so that my neighbors, conventional farmers and lovely people, one year get $12 per hundredweight for milk and next year get 20, and they don't know which one it's going to be. And they can't plan for their families and figure out how many people can go into farming in the future because they don't know how many jobs they can support. So any kind of buy into that system, I think, just perpetuates it.
There's a terrific new book that really goes at this issue. It's called Bet the Farm by Frederick Kaufman, and it shows how ludicrous it is to think that farmers should be speculating on the grains that they grow, and that really commodities are nothing but money today. And I would recommend that you read it.
Great. Thank you very much. And, there's also a question that was asked here today, and I think, it's an important one to answer for people. Somebody asked, what's fracking? And, it's something that, I spend my day in and out dealing with all the time. And, for some people, it's something new. So just, very basically, fracking is a type of gas drilling that takes literally millions of gallons of water and pumps it into the earth as a way to extract gas. And it's all the concerns that we heard here from the panel tonight are what come along with that process. But that's very basically what fracking is. It's a very extreme energy source that's a way to extract gas. We have a question here about fracking's threat to New Jersey. And, is fracking a threat to New Jersey? And if so, what is the biggest threat we face?
I guess I'll take that. Well, yes, fracking is a threat to New Jersey. First and foremost on the global export issue with all the farms and everything that drills down to our local economy. So we're affected by, we're not in isolation here in New Jersey. We have friends from neighboring states, and a lot of what we get comes from outside of New Jersey. So you can't ever look at a system on its own like that. But in New Jersey we are. Food and Water Watch has exposed a lot of documents that show that we have lots of shale and gas plays in New Jersey. So it is not outside the realm of possibility that we could have a lot of expansion of shale gas fracking here in the state. But also, and this is very important, we've been working a lot lately on fracking wastewater. So all those millions and millions of gallons of water that are produced with fracking have to go somewhere. And right now, a lot of that is either it goes back into the rivers from which that water was taken out, or it's put in a pond for, I don't know, in perpetuity that's lined with a plastic sheet, hoping that it won't flood. And there's actually just a recent report put out on the flooding issues with hurricanes that come through areas that have a lot of open water ponds of fracking wastewater. And if a river or stream floods because, I don't know, Sandy or Irene comes through and floods the entire region, then all of that fracking wastewater that was too contaminated to send anywhere for treatment just gets washed right back into the environment. So that problem, and then sending all that wastewater into treatment facilities that treat your sewage and your gray water and your other wastewater that don't have the technology to treat fracking wastewater, so it just passes right through that system and goes into our estuaries and into our ocean. So the water pollution side of that isn't even touching the air emission sides that we heard about of all the released gases and industrial air pollution that comes from fracking. That I can tell you the EPA hasn't even finished studying, and they're not sure when they're going to come up with an answer to that. All of that moves its way towards the East Coast with normal air patterns. So you're being attacked, as we like to say in the coastal zone. A lot of pollution comes from the ocean and washes right up to the beach, and all this pollution comes from land and washes right down to the beach. So we're right at this bottom point of pollution, and a lot of that's from fracking.
I would just want to add this, that we cannot be looking at it in terms of just whether it's happening right around us. I started out with climate change as one of the inevitable, a major contribution to climate change coming from this industry. Major contribution. The International Energy Agency, as I said, predicts as much as a 6-degree Fahrenheit rise in the world's temperatures, which will wipe out many species, perhaps even us, if we allow that to go forward. So this is a one for all and all for one kind of thing. When I go to the next county, of Butler County, because someone lost their water, and a reporter asked me, what are you doing coming an hour and a half to Butler County to help these people, and it's not happening on your farm? I say, today I'm a Butler County. You get that? Anybody in New Jersey that really understands this will be a Pennsylvanian in a hot minute.
I have a question specifically directed at Dean, but if any of the other panelists would like to ask it, they can. How did you get to be so cool? How do we get the...
Check my SAT score.
How do we get the American public to read labels, to know about processed food ingredients, and what steps do we take to get there?
Well, I think it's important. I think we have a responsibility. Those of us that are informed have a responsibility to share our knowledge. Knowledge that is not shared is selfish. So there's a lot of very responsible natural food stores. There's a lot of very responsible individuals. And really, the knowledge perpetuates itself. So once you begin to understand what you're looking for, reading labels, taking positions and things, it really becomes a journey. And Steve Jobs said the journey is the reward. So the process that we're going through right now, this is the reward for us. This is where we get the gratification from, and this is where we make the change.
I would just add to that really our federal government has a role to play with this, and what we've seen is that because public policy has been bought by these companies that have so much power that it's been very difficult to get the kind of labeling that we actually need. And I think one of the things that's very exciting right now that gives me a lot of hope is that in more than 30 states, there's a grassroots movement to label genetically engineered food, to actually pass state legislation. In fact, many states, the bills were actually introduced, and for instance, Connecticut, the bill has passed out of committee. Now, these bills may take a while to pass, but if bills pass in a couple of states, it means that the federal government will eventually be forced to act. And there's actually a very exciting ballot initiative that has a pretty good chance of passing out in Washington State. So I just take really a lot of gratification from the fact that people are getting politically involved and they're going to take back their food. And I think this is one of the grassroots movements that shows that people really are fed up and they're going to get involved.
I think if I could just add one thing, we need to take responsibility for educating ourselves and not put the trust in marketing and big business to falsely educate us as to what's healthy and what isn't healthy. So I really think that it's incumbent upon all of us to understand what's in our food. If you're reading ingredients and you see corn or you see soy, based on the fact that over 90% of all non-organic corn or non-organic soy is genetically modified, there's a pretty good shot that you're consuming genetically modified foods. And you can do your own homework and investigate it yourself, but it really is important that we take responsibility for what we learn.
And one other thing, Jim, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day where we were remarking on there's so many different documentaries and places to learn here, learn all these things, books that we have. And so I really think that one of the next campaigns that Food and Water Watch ought to take up is just to get enough money together so that you can buy out every television station for 4 hours one night, every TV channel, and just play like 3 great documentaries. So if you turn on the TV, you've got to watch that.
Get your checkbooks out, everybody. question here, asking the panelists to better explain the relationship between small farmers and fracking leases and how that dynamic is playing off between them. Is there anybody who'd like to take that question?
And fracking leases?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on people to lease. Many of them got gypped a few years ago. Most of the leases around me are $5 an acre. The guy that owns the rights under so-called rights, although I think nature has the first and preeminent rights, but the guy that owns the deed for minerals under my property was smart and got $1,500 an acre. There's a lot of invidious comparisons that go on around that. That's part of what I refer to as the fracturing of the community. Small farmers are in a difficult position oftentimes because there is a divide and conquer strategy on the part of the landmen to get out there and get people signed up and then basically put pressure on those that haven't signed up to say, well, we're going to get your gas anyway. We'll come right next to you, drill right next to you. It'll frack into you, and we have the right to do that according to the law of capture. And a whole bunch of malarkey like that, people hear, and they say, well, I'm not going to get anything at all out of it, and it's happening anyway. There's a series called Gas Rush Stories that you can look at online, and Gas Rush Stories number 14 by Krusi Jansa interviews some organic farmers at the premier organic farming farmers market in Pittsburgh called Farmers at Firehouse. And this one young man, who's a lovely man, I know him well, said that he just felt so much pressure to lease that he finally did, but he really doesn't know what's going to happen because his farm could be ruined either way. So he's just kind of tossing the dice because the powers that be are arrayed against him are so huge. So I think part of the issue for me is not only doing what Dean has talked about, educating ourselves, but also empowering our neighbors in such a way that they have enough information to know that if they stand up to the gas companies, they can get a lot further than they realize. A lot of people don't realize that in the leases, if you're going to do a lease, you have a fair amount of control. If you own the resources, so-called own the resources, you have a fair amount of control over what happens on the surface. You can actually build in environmental protections in the lease. Gas company might walk away, might not want to give you as much or whatever, but you can do that. People don't know you can do that. So we're having multiple discussions in my community about all of that because the pressure that people feel is such that they feel stupefied by it and they're reluctant to talk to each other about it, and therefore they get separated off from one another and taken advantage of. That's the dynamic I see going on.
Does anybody else want to? Great, I think that's really great. Thank you. I had a question here about something that wasn't discussed here, but about the current event that's going on that I think is relevant and important to this. But could somebody please explain the Monsanto Protection Act that was just signed by President Obama and what the revisions do?
So, we all know that there's been a budget crisis and that Congress is dysfunctional and it's very difficult to get a budget for the federal agencies and then a funding bill. And when you have these big must-pass bills, there is room for a lot of evilness to be done. So that's what happened with the budget bill that passed a couple of weeks ago. There were riders. And Senator Barbara Mikulski, a Democrat from Maryland, is the chair of the committee. And she allowed the legislation to pass through her committee and didn't allow votes on the riders. So the Monsanto rider is basically a precedent-setting piece of legislation that prevents judicial review during a lawsuit, often under the National Environmental Policy Act, one of our most important environmental laws. It's a lawsuit when the government is making a big decision, so a judge will come in and make a ruling on it. So in the past, for instance, with sugar beets, there was a lawsuit to stop sugar beets from going, genetically engineered sugar beets from going into production because the government hadn't done a good environmental assessment. Well, it never does a good environmental assessment for that matter, but this was a particularly bad one that didn't look at the gene flow and the super weeds and all of the problems that you have with genetically engineered crops. And so the sugar beets had to be torn up. Now they were later approved, but this rider would prevent a judge from doing this. Now this is very serious, even if you take the biotech issue out of it, because it sets a precedent with the separation of powers, having Congress step in and say that a judge cannot review this. So it's very dangerous, and we shouldn't be surprised because over a 10-year period, the biotech industry has given $272 million in campaign contributions and lobbying. They have 100 lobby shops in Washington. They've hired 13 former members of Congress, 300 former staffers of the White House and Congress, and Monsanto alone has spent $63 million lobbying and on campaign contributions. This is just buying public policy.
Let me explain this in Barney language. Okay? If you eat a genetically modified crop and you get sick, you can't sue.
That doesn't make sense.
No, that's not. It's really, it has to do with the review process of planting the crop.
If you don't want to get sick, you can't sue.
Right, well, it's when the USDA is approving the planting of a crop. Unfortunately, we don't usually have a health review. That's one of the problems with the lack of regulation of the genetically engineered products.
The next question I was going to ask kind of fits into this, and so maybe we can ask that is, how do we know whether or not the foods we're eating is safe with the limited reviews done by the Food and Drug Administration, and also with the production of crops that we're eating in New Jersey and Marcellus Shale areas? How do we know that the food we're eating is safe?
Well, from somebody that's kind of the outside of the food industry, I think that my perspective, what I do, is that I try to talk to whoever I'm getting it from. That's my general rule of thumb. And so I would go to you guys and I would try to see where I'm getting my food and if I can learn anything about it. That's my first step. And as a consumer, I think that's as much as I know where I can navigate to find something to do.
Well, number one, for good health, eliminate processed food from your diet. Anything that's processed, there's more opportunity for food safety problems, and the food isn't good for you. Conventionally produced meat is often dangerous because of food safety problems. We've practically privatized our food safety processing system, and there's room for lots of errors. And because the slaughter lines move so quickly today, like the poultry industry is pressing to allow all poultry slaughter facilities to move the birds through the slaughter line, 200 birds per minute. Right now they're doing this in some slaughter facilities. So to keep people from getting sick, there are chemical washes, trisodium phosphate, chlorine washes. So, you know, there are a lot of problems with our food system, and I think that buying food, organic food, is the best way to protect yourself from genetically engineered products, and buying locally when you can, reading labels, and being a smart consumer. But there's no way really to escape our food system because we all eat things that are milled and produced in other locations. And that's really why it goes beyond what you as an individual do. Yes, we should be educated. Yes, we should read labels. But we have, our government has an important role to play in this. And as citizens, we need to get organized and start making our elected officials who oversee these agencies do their job.
I'd say, and one of the inferences of that question is, should I trust food that comes from an area that's being fracked, like in the Marcellus? The science is really not in on whether or not air contamination in particular settles in the soil and the pasture of the forage to the extent to be unsafe, or in the vegetable crops. One could make a pretty good argument to be a little bit suspicious of that tomato in the backyard of my son's house in Philadelphia with all the cars running by there every day. That kind of science has not really been done yet. The organic certifying agencies have not really grappled with this yet. But the big missing piece here is that there are dozens and dozens of sites around the country where this precise question could be answered by doing studies where there is, as in the Barnett Shale, down in Texas, a long history of doing this, and you can see what is happening in the soil. It would be possible. It has not been done yet. The EPA is currently conducting a so-called study of fracking, and they have to ask permission to get onto the well pad sites of these private companies in order to take water samples. The federal government has to ask permission, and therefore they find it hard to answer the most basic question they want to ask. So that science on soil science and whether or not we are seeing contamination of foodstuffs coming from fracked areas is not there yet, and I would argue that it's no more riskier than lots of other things in the food system right now. I would hate to see organic farmers and even conventional farmers in fracked areas suffer as a result of sort of loose talk about this until we do have the science, because they're trying to make a living.
Thank you. So I would like to, and I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but I would like to ask each of the panelists maybe to take a minute or so just to kind of reflect on what you learned tonight, or what came out of this, or any new connections that you see that haven't been discussed, just briefly. So maybe we'll start with Sean. We'll put him on the spot.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that I wrote down on this is, as I was listening, was that you've got to think it's bigger than food, it's bigger than energy, it's bigger than water. All these things, like I said, are interconnected. And so there was a study that came out a while ago, and Jim and I have talked about this at length. For every $1 million invested in fossil fuel industry, you get 5-6 jobs, permanent long-term jobs for $1 million in employment. You get 9 green jobs in renewable energies. You get 17 jobs if you invested in infrastructure and efficiency and conservation. So if you think of it this way, the American Society of Civil Engineers gave the United States a D last week on our infrastructure across the country. All of the bridges, there's 70 main bridges or 70,000 bridges that you should drive across, or it could be 7 million, I don't know. There's lots of bridges you should drive across. All of those are bad for your car, and if it's bad for your car, it's bad for your fuel efficiency. If it's bad for your fuel efficiency, you need to use more fuel, and all of these things affect trucks bringing produce everywhere. It's all interconnected, and so really just focusing on efficiency, something even along the lines of your water coming to your house. Along the way, that pipeline has leaked because it's so old, 20% of the water that left the plant. So we're wasting all of this energy across the country on all of these systems that we don't need a grain truck to pass another grain truck passing in the opposite direction, even if you're talking in rural areas. I mean, you can do things better. You don't have to send natural gas overseas when we didn't need to bring it out of the ground in the first place. Efficiency really brings all of this together. Really, in the food, and I've used the house analogy before in the past, and I think of a house, if you want to look at yourself and your own personal efficiency, think of everything that you bring into a house, from electricity to food to books to newspapers to mailings to Netflix, and think of what goes out. And if you're minimizing everything that's going out and minimizing everything that's going in, you're doing a much better job with efficiency, your own personal efficiency. But if we work together on that, we can really prevent a lot of these things that the legal system, we've talked a lot about the legal system, is rigged against. For example, in the export of natural gas, which I talked about before, the federal government commissioned a projection study. They call it a study, but then they said it's a projection and yada, yada, yada. In that, they said that the public interest of sending all of our natural gas overseas is protected. It's in the public interest to send half of our natural gas overseas. And if you actually read the report, which I love doing, which is crazy. If you read the report on something like page 473, it tells you that they looked at the profits to the energy companies, and it's in the billions to export our natural gas overseas. And they say that outweighs the harms. But then in one paragraph that they just slide in there, they say, we didn't really, study what those harms would be, but they're outweighed. So all these systems, these reviews, these things that you don't, it never works right. And it's rigged against the farmers, it's rigged against the environment, and it's rigged against efficiency. And efficiency is something that you'd think in a great economy, in a free market system, you'd want to strive towards, but that's really not the case because we're in a foodopoly. And it's not something that is fair, and we need to work towards that.
Run for office!
I just want to point to some of the work that Bill McKibben has done that some of you may have seen in which he talks about the fact that we currently, we can only put about 500 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere without, and stand some chance of preserving the planet. That current oil and gas reserves are 5 times that much, and the oil and gas companies not only plan to burn that, but they're also doing these new extreme forms of extraction like fracking, mountaintop removal, and developing the tar sands up in Canada. The tar sands project in Canada itself generates as much CO2 on a daily basis as 1.3 million cars. We just had a tar sand kind of spill down in Arkansas in the last couple of days, owned by Exxon. You know what's happening right now? Exxon has a no-fly zone over that spill. No reporter is allowed to go up and take a look at it and take pictures of it without passing through the Exxon gatekeeper. That is the power of the oil and gas industry. And I would submit that with Tom Vilsack and others that President Obama has brought into the Department of Agriculture, the power of Big Ag is essentially the same kind of power. We have got our work cut out for us in trying to topple this awful system.
I just want to piggyback on what Sean said, and that is from a universal sense, everything is connected. You and I are connected, we're connected to the universe, and we need to connect, and we need to understand and appreciate the importance of all of us working together. We can also change this tomorrow. We can begin to change tomorrow by how we spend our dollar, and I would encourage all of you to really understand where your dollar goes. Big agribusiness will respond if we respond accordingly with how we spend our money. And please understand, everything is connected, and we really need to respect the earth and respect each other.
So our opponents want us to be discouraged, they want us to give up, they want us to be apathetic, they want us to buy things, they want us to sit in front of our television sets, well, an average of 5 hours a day, and they want us to pay attention to fluff rather than the things that are really affecting our life. And the only way to change that is to organize. Organize, organize, organize. And I am so excited that 300 people came out tonight to hear us talk, because, I mean, that's just reflects the amount of interest that people have in actually doing things. And there are a lot of things that you can do here in New Jersey. There is a wastewater bill that needs to be passed, and the governor needs to actually sign it. That means there's a lot of political work that needs to be done. There's a farm bill that's going to be debated against this again this year, and New Jersey legislators will play a role in that. And the farm bill is the biggest piece of policy that affects our food system. It's about 1,000 pages long, and we won't fix it overnight, but we need to start talking about these really important issues. We need to take back our political system, and there is a lot of energy in the country to do that now. People come to politics via issues. We need to take those issues into the political realm, get rid of these bastards in Congress and in our state houses and in our city councils that are ruining democracy, and we can do it, and we will do it. There are a lot of young people out there that want to do it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you again to the Two River Theater for offering us this great space this evening. Thank you very much to Wayne Skeller again for the great performance he gave at the reception earlier, and the Dean's Foods for providing it. Thank you to all of our sponsoring organizations, our hosts, our volunteers, and our staff. One question that I didn't ask the panelists that I really quickly want to sum up here is people said, what can we do about this? And it just, it was touched on a little bit. Right now, we're facing a major issue in New Jersey with fracking waste and the processing of that waste in the state. There's a bill right now that Governor Christie has vetoed that the New Jersey legislature can override its veto. Enough legislators voted the right way the first time to pass this bill, but there's not a lot of courage in some of these legislators to stand up to the governor and override the veto. And so we're working with our allied organizations here and around the state to mobilize people around this issue and to bring people together around this. I hope that you guys will join us in volunteering. We're going to be, and if you don't work with us, work with one of our partnering organizations, but get involved. We're going to be, out at farmers markets, petitioning, collecting postcards. For those of you who maybe are a little short on volunteer time, become a sustainer of our organization, support our work, become a member, make a commitment from that. For those of you who aren't ready to make that financial contribution, go get one of these books out in the lobby and read about the problems that are going on with our food system. But really, it's up to all of us to get more involved than we are today. And I hope that this event does a lot to take people from a place that you're ready to do more action than you came in here with, because that's how we're going to change things. That's how we're going to take our country back from these too big to fail corporations that are destroying our food, destroying our water, and destroying our way of life in this country. So thank you all very much.